Good morning, students. Hope you all are doing well. Today, we shall study a poem in English. But before starting, I want you to get ready with your notebooks and pen so that you can note down certain things. I hope you all are ready now. So let's begin. We shall start by watching a video. I want you to read whatever is shown on the screen. So, here's a video. Okay, students, so this video was about various feelings that a person with depression has. They have expressed their feelings in this video. In similar way, a poet has also expressed his feelings in the poem, and so today we shall study and appreciate the poem. Please listen. The poet is an unknown author. This poem is on page 81 and 82 of your textbook, but there is no need to open your textbook. The matter from the textbook will be there on your screens. So let us begin by reading the poem. Please pay attention carefully. Please listen. When I ask you to listen to me and you start giving me advice, you have not done what I asked. When I ask you to listen to me and you begin to tell me why I shouldn't feel that way, you are trampling on my feelings. When I ask you to listen to me and you feel you have to do something to solve my problem, you have failed me, strange as that may seem. Listen, all I ask is that you listen. Don't talk or do, just hear me. Advice is cheap. 20 cents will get you both Dear Abby and Billy Graham in the same newspaper. And I can do for myself. I'm not helpless, maybe discouraged and faltering, but not helpless. When you do something for me that I can and need to do for myself, you contribute to my fear and inadequacy. But when you accept as a simple fact that I feel what I feel, no matter how irrational, then I can stop trying to convince you and get about this business of understanding what's behind this irrational feelings. And when that's clear, the answer are obvious and I don't need advice. Irrational feelings make sense when we understand what's behind them. Perhaps that's why prayers work sometimes for some people, because God is mute and he doesn't get doesn't give advice or try to fix things. God just listens and lets you work it out yourself. So please listen and just hear me. And if you want to talk, wait a minute for your turn and I will listen to you. By unknown author. Students, I'll give you 3 minutes to go through this poem, but before that, I want you to write down these 2 questions in your notebook, and while reading, you will find answer for these questions. So please take down these questions in your notebook. The questions are, when does the poet feel that the listener has failed him? And the second question is, what is the poet expecting? So now I'll give you 3 minutes to go through this poem. I hope you all are reading. You still have 1 more minute left. Okay students, now stop reading. Let us look at the answers for the questions I told you to find answers for. So here are the questions and answers. So for the first question, when does the poet feel that the listener has failed him? The answer is when the listener thinks that he has to do something to solve poet's problem, the poet feels that the listener has failed him. And what is the poet expecting? The poet is expecting someone to just listen to him. Let us now move forward, and now we shall see what the poet is trying to tell us in each stanza. So I will begin with the first stanza. When I ask you to listen to me and you start giving me advice, you have not done what I asked. Students, in the first stanza, the poet says that when I ask you to just listen to me and you start giving me advice, then you didn't do what I asked you to do. So we human, what we do usually, students, when someone is telling us something, instead of listening to them, we give advice. A poet doesn't want that. So he is telling, if you start giving me advice when I just tell you to listen to me, you have not done what I have asked you to do. Let's read the second stanza. When I ask you to listen to me and you begin to tell me why I shouldn't feel that way, you are trampling on my feelings. Now students, if your friend comes to you and tells you that he is feeling sad, what we do? We start telling him that no dear, you should not feel like this. How many of us actually try to listen to him or understand why he is feeling that way? Very few of us. So a poet says that if you start telling me why I should not feel a certain way, then you are trampling on my feelings. Trampling means To crush means we are emotionally causing injury to his feelings. Let's look at the third stanza. When I ask you to listen to me and you feel you have to do something to solve my problem, you have failed me, strange as that may seem. In this stanza, the poet says that when I ask you to listen to me, but instead of listening, you feel that I should do something to help the person solve his problem, then you have failed the poet. Students, sometimes just listening to someone helps them a lot. Most of the time, people just want someone who will listen to them patiently. So we must try to learn to listen to them, and that is what will help them the most. Not doing something or helping them, sometimes they don't want that. They just want someone to listen to them. Listen, all I ask is that you listen. Don't talk or do, just hear me. Advice is cheap. 20 cents will get you both Dear Abby and Billy Graham in the same newspaper. So here what he's trying to say is, just listen to me. Don't talk or give me any kind of advice. I don't want advice. I want someone to listen to me. Further, he says that if I want advice, I will buy a newspaper and will get advice from great people like Abby and Billy Graham. And it will not cost me much. It will cost me only 20 cents. So he's saying that advice is very cheap to get, but I don't want advice. I want someone to listen to me. And I can do for myself. I'm not helpless, may be discouraged and faltering, but not helpless. Here in this stanza, the poet says, I'm not helpless, so don't help me. He says maybe I'm a little discouraged or faltering. Faltering means a little hesitant or worried kind of. But the poet is not helpless, so he doesn't want our help. When you do something for me that I can and need to do for myself, you contribute to my fear and inadequacy. So students, in this stanza, the poet is clearly saying that he does not want anyone to help him. He's saying, don't help me. Because when someone does something that he can do for himself, then we are just making him more insecure and make him feel that he is not good enough to do his things on his own. So the meaning of the word inadequacy, that is making the person feel that he is not good enough to do his things on his own. But when you accept as a simple fact that I feel what I feel, no matter how irrational, then I can stop trying to convince you and get about this business of understanding what's behind this irrational feeling. So students, here in this stanza, what the poet says, he says that if you accept that I am feeling a certain way, even if it may sound irrational and weird to you, but if you accept me, then he says that this will help me and I will start to find out myself why I am feeling a certain way. And I will find solution to myself. And when that's clear, the answers are obvious. I don't need advice. Irrational feelings make sense when we understand what's behind them. Students, these are very important lines. What we as a society have done is we have made depression and mental illness a taboo, which is completely wrong. Instead of making it a taboo, we should normalize it. We should accept and respect the feelings of that person. All they need at times is someone who will understand them or listen to them without judging them. And once they find such person or people around them, they begin to help themselves. They begin to solve their problems on their own. Perhaps that's why prayer works sometimes for some people, because God is mute and He doesn't give advice or try to fix things. God just listens and lets you work it out for yourself. So students, here in this stanza, what the poet is trying to say is that prayers work because God only listens. He doesn't give advice or he doesn't help. He lets you solve your problem on your own. He lets you solve your problem by yourself. So have you ever seen that when you pray, God has come to help you or he has given some advice? No, he just listens to us, and that is why the poet feels that prayers help with depression. So please listen and just hear me. And if you want to talk, wait a minute for your turn and I will listen to you. So here in this last lines, what the poet is telling is, so you all just listen to me, you please listen to me and don't talk. And if you want to talk, you please wait for your turn, and when there is your turn to talk, when your turn to talk comes, I will listen to you. So this was what a poet was trying to tell us in this poem. Now let us play a small game. The name of the game is Simon Says. Obviously this game you have been playing since your childhood. So when I say Simon Says stand up, you will stand up. When I say Simon Says sit down, you will sit down. Whenever I say Simon Says, only when I say Simon Says stand up, you will stand. And only when I say Simon Says sit down, you will sit down. So you will follow my instruction and you will play accordingly. So let's begin. Simon says stand up. Simon says sit down. Simon says sit down. Simon says stand up. Sit, stand. Sit. Simon says stand up. Simon says sit down. Simon says stand up. Sit, stand, sit, stand, sit, stand. Simon says sit down. Simon says stand up. Simon says sit down. Okay students, so from this game, why did I take this game is because many of you must have been standing and sitting when I was just saying stand and sit instead of saying Simon says stand up or Simon says sit down. So what I told you in the beginning was you will only stand when I say Simon says stand up or only sit down when I say Simon says sit down. But most of you must have been standing up when I just say stand or sitting down when I just say sit. Why did we do this? To understand the difference between hearing and listening. Let us know what is the difference between hearing and listening. So hearing has more to do with physiological act of hearing sounds than it does with making sense and connecting with the person who is talking to you. So hearing is basically a physical activity. Only sounds hit your ears but you don't understand them. You don't make effort to understand what this person is trying to say. You just keep on hearing it. So that is called as hearing. Whereas listening, on the other hand, means to pay attention to sound, to hear something with thoughtful attention and give consideration. So what hearing means, you're paying attention to what the person is talking to. Yes, so you pay complete attention and you're thoughtful of what they're saying. So that is the difference between hearing and listening, and we should listen rather than only hear a person. So listening is more important, and that is what our poet wants from us. He wants someone to listen to him and not just hear him out. Let us now move forward. And here are two poems. One is our poem, that is Please Listen, and other is the poem Invictus by William Ernest Henley. So I'll read two stanzas from Invictus and two stanzas from Please Listen, and then we'll find the difference between the two poems. Invictus by William Ernest Henley. Out of the night that covers me, black as the pit from pole to pole, I thank whatever gods may be for my unconquerable soul. In the fell clutch of circumstance, I have not winced or cried aloud, Under the bludgeoning of chance, my head is bloody but unbowed. So these were the two stanzas from Invictus. Now let's read the two stanzas from Please Listen. When I ask you to listen to me and you start giving me advice, you have not done what I asked. When I ask you to listen to me and you begin to tell me why I shouldn't feel that way, you are trampling on my feelings. Students, now I want to ask you all a question. What difference do you see in these two poems? We have read two stanzas from the poem Invictus and two stanzas from the poem Please Listen. I want you to find difference between the two poems. Look for rhyming words in both the poems. You look for rhyming scheme in both the poems, and then you will find a difference. Write down whatever difference you find in both the poems in your notebook. Yes, so in Invictus we find that there are rhyming words and there is a rhyme scheme. Whereas in Please Listen, we don't find rhyming words or rhyme scheme in the poem. Why? Because the poem Invictus is an example of traditional poetry, whereas Please Listen is a free verse, and we usually don't have a rhyming words or rhyme scheme in the free verse kind of type of poem. So this is the difference between these two poems, and our poem Please Listen is a free verse type of poem, and so we don't have rhyming words and rhyme scheme in this poem. Let's move forward. And now I want you to write the central idea of the poem Please Listen in your own words. I'll give you 1 minute to do that. We shall now see what is the central idea of the poem. Stop writing. And here's the central idea of the poem. Central idea of this poem is that we should listen when people tell us their problem rather than give advice to them. So if you haven't written the central idea, write down this. Now students, here's a short video on what is depression and what are the few symptoms of depression. So now, as we know, in this pandemic, most people are facing depression, and so we shall know what are the symptoms of identifying such people so that we can empathize with them and not hurt their feelings. So let's see a video on what is depression and what are the symptoms of depression.
Depression is the leading cause of disability in the world. In the United States, close to 10% of adults struggle with depression. But because it's a mental illness, it can be a lot harder to understand than, say, high cholesterol. One major source of confusion is the difference between having depression and just feeling depressed. Almost everyone feels down from time to time. Getting a bad grade, losing a job, having an argument, even a rainy day can bring on feelings of sadness. Sometimes there's no trigger at all. It just pops up out of the blue. Then circumstances change, and those sad feelings disappear. Clinical depression is different. It's a medical disorder, and it won't go away just because you want it to. It lingers for at least 2 consecutive weeks and significantly interferes with one's ability to work, play, or love. Depression can have a lot of different symptoms: a low mood, loss of interest in things you'd normally enjoy, changes in appetite, feeling worthless or excessively guilty, sleeping either too much or too little, poor concentration, restlessness or slowness, loss of energy, or recurrent thoughts of suicide. If you have at least 5 of those symptoms, according to psychiatric guidelines, you qualify for a diagnosis of depression. And it's not just behavioral symptoms. Depression has physical manifestations inside the brain. First of all, there are changes that could be seen with the naked eye and X-ray vision. These include smaller frontal lobes and hippocampal volumes. On a more micro scale, depression is associated with a few things: the abnormal transmission or depletion of certain neurotransmitters, especially serotonin, norepinephrine, and dopamine, blunted circadian rhythms, or specific changes in the REM and slow wave parts of your sleep cycle, and hormone abnormalities, such as high cortisol and deregulation of thyroid hormones. But neuroscientists still don't have a complete picture of what causes depression. It seems to have to do with a complex interaction between genes and environment, but we don't have a diagnostic tool that can accurately predict where or when it will show up. And because depression's symptoms are intangible, it's hard to know who might look fine but is actually struggling. According to the National Institute of Mental Health, it takes the average person suffering with a mental illness over 10 years to ask for help. But there are very effective treatments. Medications and therapy complement each other to boost brain chemicals. In extreme cases, electroconvulsive therapy, which is like a controlled seizure in the patient's brain, is also very helpful. Other promising treatments, like transcranial magnetic stimulation, are being investigated too. So if you know someone struggling with depression, encourage them, gently, to seek out some of these options. You might even offer to help with specific tasks, like looking up therapists in the area or making a list of questions to ask a doctor. To someone with depression, these first steps can seem insurmountable. If they feel guilty or ashamed, point out that depression is a medical condition, just like asthma or diabetes. It's not a weakness or a personality trait, and they shouldn't expect themselves to just get over it, any more than they could will themselves to get over a broken arm. If you haven't experienced depression yourself, avoid comparing it to times you've felt down. Comparing what they're experiencing to normal temporary feelings of sadness can make them feel guilty for struggling. Even just talking about depression openly can help. For example, research shows that asking someone about suicidal thoughts actually reduces their suicide risk. Open conversations about mental illness help erode stigma and make it easier for people to ask for help. And the more patients seek treatment, the more scientists will learn about depression, and the better the treatments will get.
So students, you saw in the video how we can help a person who is feeling depressed, and the most important thing is not comparing their depression with our normal sadness. It is very different from that. It is very different from what we usually feel. If we feel low, it is completely different from what is depression. And the second most important thing is not to make it a stigma. We should encourage them. We should talk more about depression so that the people who are feeling depressed will open up, will find help, and will get better by time. Let us now move forward. And here are 3 questions for you. I'll give you 2 minutes to write the answers for these questions. It is just like a quick recap of what we studied. And so the first question is, what is the central idea of the poem? What does the listener do when the poet asks him to just listen? And the third question is, according to the poet, how does God help people? And I'll give you 2 minutes to write the answers for this question. Your time starts now. Write the answers for this in your notebook. What is the central idea of the poem? The central idea of this poem is that we should listen when people tell us their problem rather than give them advice. Second question, what does the listener do when the poet asks him to just listen? The listener starts giving advice. He begins to tell poet why the poet shouldn't feel a certain way, and he thinks that he has to do something to solve poet's problem when the poet asks him to just listen. According to poet, how does God help people? Poet says that God is silent and listens to us when we pray and then lets us work things out ourselves. So if you haven't written the answers, write down the answers now. Copy this down. Okay students, here's another question for you and I want you to write a brief answer for this. So the question says, why should one learn to tackle one's problem by one's own self? And your time starts now. Think and then write. I hope you all are writing. Let us now look at the answer for this question, students. So, here's the answer. Why should one learn to tackle one's problem by one's own self? One should learn to solve their own problems because it makes the person brave and capable to solve any problem in life. It also helps strengthen and build self-confidence in the person about himself. Once the person develops the skill, they may find solutions to solve difficult problems in smaller, easy problems, and the problems in life may look like much more conquerable. Now students, for homework, I have sent the link of the form. You will click on that link and solve the questions that are there for you in that form. So that is your homework. And with this, we come to the end of the lesson. Thank you and take care.